learned that I didn't have to be the smartest guy in the room. I didn't have to know all the answers. I had to hire really smart people that we could learn from each other. Surround yourself with people who are smarter than you in the different areas of the business that you need to run. In fact, you're the leader, and they're going to help you look like a great leader.
Welcome to our 6th episode of Leading with Relevance. This is a podcast series featuring some of today's most prominent leaders, people who are busting through the status quo, I like to say, and impacting companies and communities. Our goal is to interview and highlight the personal and professional journeys of the people that we were interviewing. I'm Tino Mantella, the Chief Strategy Officer for Relevance, and I'm loving the opportunity to talk to leaders. The podcast will run about 20 minutes, but you can also visit the website to get the full podcast. We call it, just like 60 Minutes does, Relevance Overtime. So hopefully you'll join us on that as well. Today I have the pleasure of introducing and interviewing my friend Michael Coles, who's the co-founder of American Cookie Company back in 1977, the Great American Cookie Company back in 1977. He's a former CIO of Caribou Coffee. He's written a book called Time to Get Tough. By the way, it's not the only title like that. I might ask Michael about that. He's an athlete. He set 3 transcontinental cycling records. He's a survivor of a near-death experience related to a motorcycle accident. And one of the things that you'll find very interesting, he's a man that's gone from poverty and adversity to leadership to philanthropist. Him and his wife have the Michael J. Coles Business School. They have an endowment for veterans and do a number of other great things. Michael, welcome to Leading with Relevance.
It's been nice. It's nice to be with you again, Tina.
Yeah, it's been a while. You were in Brooklyn, you were in Buffalo, you were in Miami, you were in middle class, you were in poverty. So tell us about the things that you feel most shaped you during those early years.
Yeah, I up until I was about 10 years old, I had a pretty not normal life. I had a pretty good life. My father, I would say our family was upper middle to upper middle class. And I came home from school one day when I was 10, and there was a panel truck sitting outside my house, and all of our belongings were on it. My parents notified me that my father had gone bankrupt. We moved to an apartment. And the truth is that it didn't seem that different from where we lived, other than the fact we had our own house. We had a big backyard. I had a lot of friends. And now we're in a new neighborhood with no backyard and no friends. My dad thought he would recover, and so he never really stopped spending. When I was about 12, my dad, his wages were being so badly garnished that we literally had to move in the middle of the night. They sold everything they had. We packed everything up in a car, and we drove to Florida. And so we moved to a horrible apartment. We had a beautiful apartment in Buffalo. We moved to this less than 300 square foot apartment, one bedroom. My parents had to sleep on a screen porch in Miami. There was no air conditioning in this apartment. And literally, I woke up that morning, again, almost 13. And if you ask what shaped my life, it was looking around this place, which was really horrible. And I had to make a decision. And the decision was, do I accept this as a temporary situation, or is this the new reality? And do I need to get a job and help my family? And I chose to get a job and help my family. Dad never recovered. He wound up doing okay, got a good job. But pretty much, we kind of lived at that point paycheck to paycheck. And if anybody asks me what drove me or has driven me my whole life, it has been the fact that I never wanted to ever again have that feeling again that I had that morning. And so I'd say that every bit of success I've had, if you want to call it that, in my life, was all due to that day.
You had a normal childhood and didn't lose everything and had to start work at 13. You did it
Yeah.
because it had to be done. I guess we talk about what shapes a person, sometimes it's adversity, but how would you answer that?
I don't think my life would have turned out as well, honestly.
Yeah.
I think I think the fact that I met a guy named Irving Settler who owned a clothing store and hired me at 13 and took me under his wing and was my incredible mentor and taught me about business and taught me really about life, he and his wife. And the big thing that Irving gave me was a sense of my worth.
How did you get connected with the Chicago store, Mr. Eddie's? And then I'm going to ask you, and you can kind of segue right into that, because you were already spunky, you were already so confident in yourself because you wanted more money from the man, and you said, "Don't pay me for 4 weeks," and
Right.
negotiated. So talk about that whole story and your big sale.
First of all, I got married when I was 20. And my wife, my former wife, who I was married to for almost 8 years, her family was from Chicago. When I got up there, I had to continue to save money to go to school. And so I went looking for a job. I had some money saved, but not enough. I looked so young. And so Mr. Eddie, and then at that time, that store was called Mr. Junior,
Okay.
but it was owned by a guy named Eddie Pillay, who was an incredible guy. This is 1965, 64. This is 1964. We were selling young kids suits that were $100.
Oh, wow.
And and that would probably be like selling a kid today a $600 or $700
Yeah.
suit. And so he looked at me and he said, "No one is going to take someone that looks like you serious enough to buy from you, to buy this expensive clothing." And he knew Irving because it was a fairly tight group of entrepreneurs.
Okay.
And I said, "Look, I'll tell you what, I'll go to work for you for 4 weeks. You don't have to pay me a penny. At the end of 4 weeks, if you think you want to hire me, you got to pay me $200 a week." And he
Right.
said, $200 a week? He said, "I don't pay my managers $200 a week." I said, "Well, look, then you got a great deal. You know, I'm honest. I won't steal from you. But at the end of 4 weeks, you either hire me and pay me 200 or don't pay me anything and I'll go find a job somewhere." And I said, "What do you got to lose?" So he said, "Okay," he gave me
Oh,
the
yeah.
address. Anyway, so I showed up, and the first week I was there, he walked in the store, and there were something like 16 pieces of clothing, sport jackets, suits, shirts, ties, socks, underwear, everything you could think was piled up on the counter. And then he came walking in, and he was so upset. He walked in, and he looked at me, and he said, "Who put all that stuff on the counter?" I said, "I did." He said, "Well, you better put it away." And I said, "It's all sold." And he was speechless. The biggest sale ever made in the store was almost $3,000
Yeah.
sale. And he hired me on the spot that day and
Yeah.
paid me $200 a week.
How did you get that confidence? Was it something you just felt like you had to do? You had to make more money, so you just going for it, or
Yeah, I think that was part of it, but I knew what I needed to make. I didn't have anything, so I had nothing to lose.
nothing to lose?
And so it was easy to make the offer. And honestly, if he had come back and said, "I'll pay you $150 a week," I probably would have said, "Okay," because that's really what I wanted.
You stayed in clothing for 19 years, I think, and then you shifted to somehow into the
The
Great
cookie
American
business.
Cookie Company. So how'd you
Yeah.
make that transition? And I want to hear the story about starting with the $8,000 investment.
Well, let me go back.
Okay.
So I wound up having a very successful career. I never went to college because I got offered a job. I got offered a job with a very big company at that time. And I came back and told the guy who had recommended me, I said, I just don't know if I want to do this. I really want to go to college. I said, "Look, take the job. He said, do it for a year. And if it turns out you don't like it, then go to college. And so I went to work for HIS. I did very well. I got a territory at the end of 5 months. It was the worst territory in the company, 65 territories. Mine was number 65.
Wow.
In 2 years, I turned it around to number 3 in the company. I won a big sales contest. I had Western Michigan, and I told him I wanted the whole state of Michigan. I was 22 years old, and he said to me, "You're too young. No one in Detroit will take you seriously." It had a very familiar ring to it. It sounds like I was talking to Eddie Pillay. I said, "Well, if you don't give me the whole state of Michigan, I'm going to quit and find another job." And he said, "Nope, you're too young." And so I got another job, and he called me in December, and I took this job with this company called Mail out of Atlanta. And I moved to Detroit, and I was extraordinarily successful. So that job led me to go to Atlanta, which I always wanted to live in Atlanta. And so I wound up moving to Atlanta and went with Mail. And then I left Mail and I started a small chain of clothing stores, discount kind of stores. Did great. They did lots of volume, but I made no money. And I wound up going bankrupt, and I started doing a lot of self-evaluation as to what happened. And then I decided with a buddy of mine that we would start a company on our own called the Great American Clothing Company. And so I did that for about 10 months, 11 months. We did very well. My partner and I had a big disagreement how the company should grow. And I basically told him I was leaving to go on a trip to San Diego for a clothing show. And I said, "Look, when I get back, we got to figure out a way to separate." And so I was out in California, and I saw a cookie store in a mall. I went and stood in the line to buy cookies, and I couldn't believe the line. And I talked to the store manager, and he told me how much revenue they were doing and what their food cost was. I didn't believe any of it. It just sounded all too amazing. The margins were incredible. So I came back, Donna picked me up at the airport, and I said, "Look, I'm going to sell my interest to my partner. And while we're figuring out what we're going to do for the rest of our lives, we're going to open up a cookie store." And so it turned out I called a friend of mine who was also in the clothing business. And when I called him, he said, so his wife, Susan, made the best chocolate chip cookies I've ever had in my whole life. She always served them at the shows and stuff.
Uh-huh.
And so they were literally working on the same idea. We got together, we put our two plans together, it made a fit. And we put $4,000 in each. We went to CNS Bank and borrowed $25,000. But 6 weeks after we started the company, I had a motorcycle accident on my way home. And I woke up in Northside Hospital with 2 doctors standing over my bed telling me I would live, but I would probably never walk normally. And so I had to focus on the cookie business. And, that one store wound up being several hundred stores.
So did you have a big challenge that you had to overcome that you want to talk about?
In the cookie business? Yeah, we had plenty of challenges. No one that I've talked to that has ever gained any kind of success will tell you that it's a straight line.
Yeah.
It's the bumps in the road that I think change the trajectory of the business. It's the things you learn from the things that go wrong. And one of the things I always talk about is the fact is that it's how you deal with the unexpected that really changes the projection of a company.
You've talked about how you found that retention and job satisfaction isn't about money, it's the most important thing. And you talk about the culture, with 400 stores, the importance of retention, job satisfaction. What's your philosophy around how you built that culture?
Well, first of all, remember the cookie company was a franchise business.
Okay, so you did the franchise, yeah.
So it was a franchise business, and we wound up when we had close to 400 stores. We only had about 60 franchisees In the beginning, like a lot of startup franchise companies, the people you first bring in aren't necessarily the people that are the best people to build your franchise, because you wind up bringing people in that are too much like yourself.
Hmm.
And people that are too entrepreneurial
Yeah.
should not be in the franchise business,
Yeah.
because
Because they want to do their own thing.
and we wound up with a very close-knit franchise group who all bought into the vision of what this company could be. They ran their stores as close, some ran them better, many ran them better than we did, because they were closer to the operation. But they understood, the philosophy of the company, and what later became, the mantra was just share the fun of cookies. And that didn't just mean the customers, that meant our employees, that meant our vendors, that meant anybody that touched the business.
Yeah.
We wanted them to have fun with it. From the very beginning, we weren't trying to be the biggest. We were just trying to be the best.
Yeah.
And I think that that is the guiding point, and I got a lot of that from my old boss, Irving, who was crazy about customer experience. And
You were kind of ahead of the game with now they talk about customer success, customer experience, focusing on the customer. What made a great franchisee? Was there certain characteristics or?
the philosophy of our company was, this is an opportunity to be in business for yourself, but not by yourself.
Got it.
So they were coming in knowing that they could come into this company. We would show them how to do things, but if they had suggestions on how to do something better,
Uh-huh.
we would listen. If they had product ideas, we would listen.
You
It was
sold the
fine.
company, you did fine.
In
Why did you
1998,
sell? And then how did you move from there to Caribou as the CEO and chair?
we sold the company in 98. It was 21 years. I was in the business. I didn't expect to be there more than 5 to 7 years. We were there 21 years. My partner had basically moved to Florida. He was semi-retired. And I got, in 96, I got kind of caught up in politics.
Yeah.
I ran against Newt Gingrich for the House. And then in 1998, I ran for the US Senate against Paul Coverdale. But I lost both those races. And, I was doing a lot of nonprofit work, and I was doing some consulting. And because I thought, honestly, in 98, I really was confident I was going to win that race. And I figured I would, have a different path in my life. And when that didn't work out, um, I always thought I would just be very happy retired and go fly fishing and play golf and ride my bike and all that stuff. And I did a project for a company that had bought Caribou Coffee out of Minneapolis 2.5 years earlier. The company was not doing well, and they hired me to do an analysis as to whether or not they had just made a bad deal. So I did this analysis for them. I went to Chicago, I went to Minneapolis, I went to Washington. They had stores in Atlanta. And I did the worst thing that a consultant can ever do. I fell in love with the brand while
Yeah.
doing this job, and figured out why the company was not doing well. But I loved the brand and felt like it could really go up against a company like Starbucks. And so when I came back from my trip, I went to see the managing partner of the firm that owned it. And I said, you don't have to pay my expenses, and you don't have to pay for the report. You don't have to pay one penny for it. And he said, well, why is that? And I said, because I'm not giving you the report. And they were like, well, why are you not going to give us the report? Because you've got a management problem. And I said, if I give you the report and you try to get this your CEO to implement it, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And so
Wow.
I'm just going to say, I'm going to just keep it to myself. However, if you make a change of management, I'd be willing to buy into the company and go up there and get this thing on the right track. And that's what happened. And less than 2.5 years after I got there, the company was doing well enough that I was able to take it public on NASDAQ
Yeah.
for a very successful IPO.
So what would you say to entrepreneurs about like being bold or, taking that major leap or, how do you think about that?
So here's the thing, Tina, over a lot of years, and especially when I was writing my book, I had a lot of time to reflect on my own travel, my own journey. And one of the things I realized, I had always been in very disruptive businesses. Uh, because back in the day when I started with Darwin's, there was no young men's business, young women's business. It was just blooming. It was just starting. And it was disrupting all of the traditional clothing companies. And the same thing when I went to work for Mr. Eddie or Mr. Junior at the time. It was the same thing. He was a disrupt when I went to work even with Mail. It was a disruptive company. It was disrupting the jean business at the time. But when we started the cookie company and the way we did it, it was virtually a clothing store that was selling cookies because
Hmm.
it had lots of inventory. We had suggestive selling. We had smiling people on the front counter, and it was disrupting the bakery industry. It was disrupting the cookie industry. And I think we succeeded, frankly, because we didn't know what the hell we were doing. And all we knew how to do was basically run a retail business.
Yeah.
And so we ran that cookie business like a retail store.
So you talked about your motorcycle accident, near death experience. You're told you couldn't walk, and that led you, I think, to dedication to cycling and, holding
Bicycling, yeah, bicycling.
bicycling and holding some records. So talk about like the training that you had to do. So tell us about that story.
So about 9 months after my accident, we lived in Kennesaw, and we had a very steep driveway at our house up to the mailbox. And my daughter was 3 years old at the time, and she said to me, "Let's race to the mailbox." And I figured even on two canes, I could
You
I
could beat
could
her.
beat her up the driveway. And when I took off to run, the pain was excruciating. And it was virtually the first time since my accident that I realized I was disabled.
Yeah.
And it wasn't so much disabled in my legs, it was disabled in my mind, because it was the very first time in my life that doctors had told me what my limits were, and I believed them. When I came back in the house, I just told Donna, I can't spend the rest of my life like this. I got to try to figure out a way to try to be better. And I started riding a stationary bike to be able to get some aerobic training. And I eventually went from an aerobic bike to a regular bike. I started getting stronger and stronger. And like many things in my life, I got a little carried away with it. And and I started riding longer and longer distances. I realized how lucky I was that I had had the fortitude and the determination to get better, and that there had to be a lot of people out there that might have given up, and maybe I could do something in cycling that would give them kind of a different perspective and get them to do more than they think they can. And so I got this crazy idea that in that little 100 foot time, I said, what if I rode across the country on a bike? And so then I started researching it and found out that there was a record from Savannah to San Diego. And that became my focus, to try to break that record, which I did in 19. I trained for 3 years. I broke the record in 82. And so in 1984, I set out one more time to break my record. I broke my record across the country in 11 days, 8 hours, and 15 minutes. Broke my record by over 4 days. And then in 1989, I joined the four-man team to do the race across America. We went from Los Angeles to New York, 3,000 miles. We crossed the country in 5 days, 1 hour, 8 minutes. It's the fastest crossing of America ever.
It still is. Wow, that's amazing.
And it's the fastest 3,000 miles ever covered under human power.
Wow. And we're
And
just
both records still stand.
so I'm reading your book for the second time and I'm enjoying it just as much as I did the first time. So you Talk about sharing life lessons on resilience and leadership. We've talked a lot about that. What motivated you to write the book?
I started out wanting to write the book for my kids because I realized I wanted to give them something that really talked about where I came from. And so they would have an understanding of perseverance and love of life and all those things that I've learned along the way. And when I started really getting serious about writing it, I realized that maybe the message was bigger than just for my family. And I finally got to the point where I just realized that, I needed to write this. 2.5 years later, we had a book. It still continues to sell pretty
Yeah.
well. But I have thought about an audiobook because
Yeah.
there's a big demand
There's a
for it.
market for it. Yeah.
But one thing I will say to your audience is that all of the royalties from the book go to a scholarship fund at Kennesaw State University to support veterans. Well, remember, the name of my book is Time to Get Tough: How Cookies, Coffee, and a Crash Led to Success in Business and Life.
Speaking of politics, you did run and you ran against a couple of really big names. How tough was that to not win?
Well, it was interesting. I would say that by the time I ran in '98, I lost in '96 against Newt.
Gingrich.
And
Yeah.
then by the time I ran in '98, I had a different perspective of outcome. When I lost, I recalled the woman that was running my campaign manager, and I said to her, Kate, I said, all right, what do we do now? She said, well, I don't know what you're doing now. She said, but I'm going back to Washington. And she said, I suggest you hire a moving company to get all the stuff out of the offices. And it was so foreign to me because in business, when you have a downturn or when
Yeah.
something, you can tweak it, you can figure out how to make it right. But at the end of the day in politics, when the vote is counted, it's over. It's just over. And the hardest part for me were there were so many issues that I got so and you're talking to the people who the issues directly affect. I couldn't walk away from it. And then I realized after I lost that as a private citizen, there's a lot of things you can do privately, like veterans right now.
Yeah.
The scholarship, we can't I'm not rich enough and the thing's not big enough to help veterans everywhere in the world. But if I can help veterans that are trying to finish their degree at KSU, we're good about that.
Looking back on your life of many journeys, what are you most proud of?
Well, I'd say the thing I'm the most proud of is my marriage of 52 years.
Yeah, God bless you.
And all the things that, the ups and downs that Donna have been through, my motorcycle accident, all the things that Donna has put up with me. I'm probably the proudest. I think that honestly, the thing I'm probably the most proud of is living a righteous life and not being self-absorbed and trying to do whatever I can to help others. And
if you could leave the listeners with one piece of advice regarding relevant leadership, what would it be?
I've had the opportunity along the way to ask people that very same people that I have come in contact with. And one of them was Colin Powell. What do you think makes a great leader? And he turned and he looked at me, he said, you're a great leader if people will follow you, even if it's only out of curiosity.
Yeah.
And that has really stuck with me. On the other hand, Zell Miller, who was a very good friend of mine, when I talked to him about his first attempt to change the flag, he said, when you're leading a change about changing the flag and you look behind you and nobody's there, you realize you're just out for a stroll.
I love that.
And I mean, I think that leaders lead by listening to the people that they're trying to lead. And I learned that I didn't have to be the smartest guy in the room. I didn't have to know all the answers. I had to hire really smart people that we could learn from each other. Surround yourself with people who are smarter than you in the different areas of the business that you need to run. Don't let that intimidate you. In fact, you're the leader, and they're going to help you look like a great leader because you may brought the right people around. One of the things that has made it successful is the fact that I listen. I listen, and I don't just listen. I try to absorb and see
Yeah.
if we're on the right track. And lastly, I have always been customer centric, always customer centric. And knowing that it's a lot easier to keep a customer than it is to get a new one.
Yeah. Well, Michael, as always, thank you.
All
All
right.
right. Thanks.
Good
Have
to
a good
talk
trip.
with you.
All right. Take
Yeah.
care. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.